In today's Meta Monday episode, I'm going back to an oldie but a goodie deck profile, Diaboromon. Deck profiles are one of my favorite videos to do on this channel, and if you find these videos informative, do consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell for future content. Diaboromon has been a constant thorn in every format, even topping a few events in previous formats. But in recent meta, it hasn't topped in many events, nor hasn't seen much of a showing, being replaced by X-Antibody as the rogue matchup. But with today's build, I've had successful games against yellow, blue, and purple, arguably the top 3 best meta decks in the format. And while this build could run the expensive promo Diaboromon, this build is a control variant. Let's go over the card by card, the strengths, the weaknesses, the combos, and the side deck. This deck runs 5 level 2s, 13 level 3s, 11 level 4s, 9 level 5s, 8 level 6s, 2 level 7s, 2 option cards, and 5 Tamers. For level 2s, this deck runs the standard 1 copy of BT2 Sumemon and 4 copies of BT5 Sumemon. With BT2 Sumemon, you can provide DP buffs for your Digimon, if there are Digimon with the same name as the Digimon above it, on the field. While only on your turn, that 2000 DP buff can be the difference between life and death if you hit one of your opponent's top-end Digimon. But there are buffs elsewhere to carry you if you don't end up with this egg. BT5 Sumemon is always going to be my 4 of to get draws I need. With a lower than normal rookie count, draw power is imperative in this deck to keep your deck moving. There aren't a lot of substitutes for this build, considering Pagumon only procs on black Digimon. With all of your Diaboromon being white, you have no value to gain off of this. Because of this, you're pretty much limited to just the babies mentioned above. For level 3s, this deck runs 13 in the form of 4 BT2 Caramon, 2 Chumon, 4 BT5 Caramon, and 3 EX1 Caramon. 4 BT2 Caramon is an absolute beast in this deck, allowing you to draw multiple cards if the Digimon above it is played. In an unideal situation, if you had Digivolved into a Kurisarimon in your raise in the previous turn, you could slap down a Kurisarimon to choke your opponent to 2 if they hand you 3 memory. Likewise, you could choke them at 1 if you have the EX1 Kurisarimon and draw a card. Chumon is going to be a mandatory in this deck, considering the hybrid format abuses Bokomon like no freaking other. BT5 Caramon is your primary searcher in this deck, finding your Aratas and your unidentified Digimon. Within this specific deck profile, there are a total of 7 targets that are not viable. And finally, 3 EX1 Caramon. EX1 Caramon helps with DP buffs for your Digimon, but it's not the primary rookie you're looking for. It does count as another target though. Not a lot of substitutes for this again, as your remaining Chumon are in the side deck if you need more memory blockers. For level 4s, this deck runs 4 copies of 4 BT2 Kurisarimon, 3 BT5 Kurisarimon, 2 Mechanorimon, and 2 EX1 Kurisarimon. True, BT2 Kurisarimon can be blocked by a lot of memory blockers in today's format, but when it goes off, it's still very deadly to keep it on your turn. If you happen to build 2 stacks simultaneously, having the rush from BT5 Kurisarimon can be game-ending. 2 Mechanorimon for extra blocking, and 2 EX1 Kurisarimon for unsuspending your Diaboromon on your turn if a Diaboromon gets deleted. This Digimon's more of a game finisher in case you need it, but that's why it's at 2 copies instead. For this lineup, you could reverse the BT2 and BT5 Kurisarimon at 3 and 4 copies instead, if you're going for a more aggressive strategy. For level 5s, this deck runs 3 copies of BT2 Infamon, 2 copies of BT5 Infamon, and 4 copies of EX1 Infamon. BT2 Infamon enables for your Diaboromon to be an evo cost of 2. Ultimately, you have 2 choices. Either have the Warumunzemon for the 2 cost evo at level 5 and then go into Diaboromon for 3. Or, you go into the Infamon for 3 and then the Diaboromon for 2. Personally, I felt the searchable level 5 is more valuable than bottom decking it. BT5 Infamon is a great target to go with your blocker Diaboromon, especially if your opponent has to just beat over it and generate another free body for next turn. In addition, it's a great Warp Digivolve target on Caramon that 100% chokes your opponent to 1 memory if they handed you 3 memory after playing a Tamer this format. And finally, 4 copies of EX1 Infamon. This one is a great choice against the hybrid format, mainly for the fact that against yellow, purple, and red, that crossover from level 4 hybrid to the reduced cost level 5 is a giant finger to their play, because it'll just pass to your turn for that extra 1 memory. In addition, its inheritable gives all of your other Diaboromon plus 2000 DP, meaning that if you have multiple of these on the board, they could be potentially 5k or 7k blockers. Moving to level 6s, 4 BT5 Diaboromon and 4 EX1 Diaboromon. BT5 Diaboromon is a token generator galore, not needing a swing and is cheaper than the other Diaboromon from BT2. EX1 Diaboromon has the best defense, making all your Digimon blockers. There isn't a lot of hard removal in the game right now that's being used, and as a result, this deck can stall a lot of decks out. Blue Hybrid? Sure, you can stun 1 or 2 tokens, but 4 or 5? Good luck. EX1 Diaboromon also has the added benefit of, if it's checked in security, generate a Diaboromon token. And in one of my test games where I went for a Susanmon play for taking out 3 security and then swinging with Pokemon for game, I lost because I revealed 2 EX1 Diaboromon, which generated just the right number of token blockers to prevent me from taking game. This card is crazy. For level 7s, this deck runs 2 copies of Armageddonmon. Remember how I mentioned I went for a Susanmon play a few seconds ago? My wife actually slapped down the Armageddonmon for protection against Susanmon. Being a level 7 Digimon, his when Digivolving effect didn't proc. Armageddonmon is a great utility for preventing Susanmon from going off, and being that final rusher for game. For option cards, this deck runs 2 copies of Catastrophe Cannon. While there are a lot of other option cards that could go in this build, Catastrophe Cannon can generate another Diaboromon. If it's checked in security, you can de-Digivolve, and if you have an EX1 Diaboromon already out, you have another free blocker on the board. All other option cards have been moved to the side deck, due to the fact that Catastrophe Cannon can at least de-Digivolve a Digimon potentially to the Tamer, but Ultimate Flare wouldn't delete it, and is much more expensive. And finally, this deck runs 5 Tamers in the form of 1 BT4 Izzy Azumi and 4 Arata Sanada. I've always loved 1 copy of Izzy Azumi for stable memory. It can also help you rearrange the top 3 cards for evolution climbing. Arata will always be a mandatory of 4, allowing you to gain 1 memory if you have an unidentified Digimon in your trash, and when you Digivolve into Diaboromon, you can suspend Arata to generate another token. For strengths and weaknesses, this deck has the strength of pushing out blockers galore. If you manage to hit that top end blocker Diaboromon with Arata Sanadas, your opponent has very limited ways to get rid of it. In the hybrid format, blue can only stun 1 blocker at a time. Against yellow hybrids, you can take the time to build wide before going all in into security. As for purple, purple loses their Schwartzler's Thoughts option to delete level 5s and lower, as your Diaboromon tokens are level 6. While piercing from red and green-red hybrid can be an issue for the multiple security rips, they still need a clean security check before they can take lethal. But the biggest strength in my opinion is the hybrid format typically has your opponent passing 2 to 3 memory early on, meaning you'll always have multiple Digivolutions if they're super aggressive early on, and you manage to get the level 3, 4, and 5 climb. As for weaknesses, there are only 4 ways to search cards in this deck. The BT5 Caramon. Because of this, mulliganing can be a factor to send important pieces that may never be seen again. And as always, the combos. This deck wants you to set up Diaboromon quickly. Bottom line. For functionality, this deck wants to utilize memory for all the shenanigans you can potentially do, which is why I focused the BT2 Kurosariumon over the rush. Defense felt better in the main board than board rushing. Let's assume on average your opponent's going to hand you 3 memory, due to Tamers in this format being 3 cost. At 3 memory, you can evo into Caramon, then Kurosariumon, then an Infamon for 3 memory, putting your opponent to 2. Next turn, you can Digivolve into Diaboromon and potentially generate 1 or 2 tokens, depending on if they revealed Arata if they swing into security. While there's no way to check security, typically having the blocker Diaboromon up quickly is best, because if your opponent hits EX1 Diaboromon in security, that's another free blocker and attacker for you. Finally, for side decks, this deck looks at the following tools for its matchups. 2 Chewmon for additional memory choking, 2 Grumblemon for a secondary final attacker, probably would swap out Mechanories if you're going for a more aggro gameplay, 2 Promo Kurosariumon for diverting option cards to your tokens if you're trying to protect your blocker Diaboromon, 2 Ultimate Flares for wider building boards and de-Digivolving their Digimon. I went with Catastrophe Cannon for the fact that it's cheaper, and more than likely they'll de-Digivolve to their Tamer, which doesn't get deleted as it's not a level 3 Digimon. And finally, Iron Fisted Onslaught for the bigger boys. I don't know how common you'd see this getting cited in, but overall this would be a freebie slot for anything. Playtesting with Diaboromon has been super fun, and the best part, a large majority of this deck is pre-BT7 Next Adventure, with Grumblemon being the only card that you really need to add to the side deck. What are your thoughts on Diaboromon as another road deck choice in the meta? Let me know in the comments below. As always, this is DIGI-PANDA, logging out.